Hello and welcome to this eSchool News webinar on building a virtualized ecosystem, how to cloud like an IT boss. My name is Dennis Pierce and I'll be your host for this event. I'm the former editor of eSchool News, now a freelance education writer and consultant, and I'm excited to have you join us for what should be a very informative session. Today's webinar is sponsored by Education Networks of America, which designs and builds future-ready network, cloud, and security solutions for education and library customers. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to go over some of the features of the platform we're using for this webinar. This event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar along with the PDF of the slides. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the purple Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, typing your question into the pop-up box and hitting submit. We'll save those questions for a Q&A session with our presenters at the end of the webinar. We also have a group chat function that you can launch by clicking on the blue chat button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use this feature to chat among yourselves or to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you have a technical question. But please don't use this feature to ask the panelists questions. If you have a question for the speakers, then you can use the Q&A box that I just mentioned. If you find that you're having a hard time reading the text on the slides, you can enlarge that portion of your screen by clicking on the box in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or you can click on the double arrows for a full screen view of the slide presentation. Finally, we encourage you to join the back channel conversation on Twitter by using the Twitter handle @ENAConnects and the hashtag ESNWebinar in your tweets. ENA has made a few resources available for you to download as well, and you can find those in the additional resources box to the left of your screen. With these logistical items out of the way, let's go ahead and meet our presenters. Leading a conversation with our panelists will be Simone Welter, a senior product manager at ENA. Having spent the last decade delivering cloud products to IBM customers across all industries, Simone now helps bring ENA's uniquely designed cloud services to K-12 schools, libraries, colleges, and universities. Simone will be leading a discussion with 4 expert panelists: Dr. Kenneth Thompson, Chief Information Technology Officer for the San Antonio Independent School District, which serves about 55,000 students in more than 100 locations; Jill Pierce, Chief Technology Officer at McMinn County School System in Tennessee; Rod Haupt, National Director of Business Development for ENA; and Michael McCurley, Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Technology and Innovation for ENA. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Simone.
Thank you, Dennis. Good afternoon. My name is Simone Welter, and I'm the Product Manager of Education Networks of America's Cloud Services. ENA provides school districts with critical technology solutions that include broadband, Wi-Fi, security, communications, cloud, and analytics, serving almost 800 school districts and libraries nationwide. We'll be hearing from 4 esteemed panelists today, 3 of whom have built and implemented comprehensive cloud strategies for their school districts, and 1 who is supporting those strategies with innovative cloud services designed for the education community. Our first panelist today is Rod Haupt. Rod is ENA's National Director of Business Development, bringing with him over 30 years of experience as an IT leader in K-12 and state government. Thank you for joining us today, Rod. Rod, you led the development of Cleveland Metropolitan School District's cloud strategy during your tenure there as CTO. What is the importance of having a comprehensive cloud strategy?
Good afternoon, everyone, and Simone, thank you. It's great to be a part of this esteemed panel to have this conversation around cloud and how to cloud like a boss. I think the topic is befitting this new wave that we are experiencing in technology, but in particular in education. For us and for me, when I was in Cleveland, we really looked at where were we headed. One thing that we know that the workforce is changing dramatically, and these changes are reflected in increasing demands for upskilling and data choices and greater focus on the digital dexterity and more emphasis on collaboration and collaborative work environments. And so when I listened to what the demand was clamoring for and what the superintendent / CEO thought about and how do we transform the organization, we needed a leveling playing field, and the cloud offered that platform would allow us to deliver tools and materials to meet the digital demand, but also put us in an advanced state because we could scale faster and adopt solutions even in a faster time frame. But that all came with dialogue and conversation to really start to understand what we needed. So we had to define from a requirements perspective, where do we want to be as an organization? And my conversation with the CEO was, where's your tolerance for risk? Where's your tolerance for leading edge and not being on the bleeding edge? And what do you expect if we make this digital transformation in adopting the cloud and the strategies associated with that? That in itself turned into more of a conversation with the executive team, because it requires the executive team to also buy into it. And we always hear team, and so I started using the analogy, team, everybody achieves more, right? If we actually all buy into the direction. It's nice when you can develop a strategy and the CIO has educated enough of the senior executives and that starts to trickle out and then bubble up from the bottom because everybody understands where the strategy is going. So as individuals are thinking about a cloud strategy and development of, it really needs to start with a buy-in from the executive leadership of the organization and understanding of why we are actually doing this. Today, I think we'll also hear from the rest of the panelists about their strategies associated with financial burdens of alleviating some of the risks that are associated with continuous capital expenditures and the strategy of going to an operational or OpEx type of strategy where you can predict what your costs are going to be for a longer term. You will also hear about risk and reward. What is that going to look like, which is critically important. All factors that we thought about as well as we were developing that strategy. And then fully then, where are you willing to take some risk and to fail forward, if you will, because this is going to be an ongoing journey, which we found. We all like to put a stake in the ground and say, we have achieved X, but along the way, we're going to have some learnings along the way that will drive us into a different direction, but it doesn't mean that we abandon the solution. And the cloud is going to be one of those things that will help individuals deliver faster, but also going to open up the door for opportunities for you to reevaluate what you're doing organizationally. So that's a lot to tell you why it's important. There's a lot of things that factor into this decision. We'll also talk about what is right for the cloud today, and the panelists will share what's going to be the right mix. You're going to have to do some evaluation and techniques in order for you to make the right decisions around that. But I think for us in Cleveland, it was important for us to stay relevant. It also played into an overall strategy for our productivity suite that we were adopting, which also tied into our ERP solution. We were a Microsoft organization, and the ERP solution was going to be a software as a service adopted solution offered through the cloud, and it needed to integrate seamlessly with our back office productivity tool. So that was all stitched together as we started thinking about how do we start to prepare for this in a timeline that was all connected, if you will. Meaning, if we're going to switch out our desktop operations and our back office productivity tool, what does that look like? Education associated with that, professional development for our user community, as well as then tying in the ERP solution. And then the platform to deliver that was through the cloud strategy.
I know Cleveland, is pretty technology forward. Do you expect to see more districts adding cloud computing specifically to their cloud strategy?
I do. It's a fantastic question. So the fortunate thing for me, because I get to travel nationally and talk more about cloud strategy and where districts are thinking and leading that direction, while there are pockets of considering, because adoption of Google classrooms and things of that nature, you're already headed down that path. Where they're, what I'm seeing is that how are we starting to connect all of our platforms together where it makes sense? I think more districts are seeing the value associated with making this transition and understanding that the capital expenditure days are shortening because we are going to be operating from limited dollars, and it's going to allow us to start to shift that model so we have predictability about what we need. And also it's going to start to offer some application rationalization opportunities to say what we've been using in the classrooms or just in the district as a whole. On the business and operations side, we can go away from those tools, which will actually give dollars back. And I've also seen that people are thinking about the collaboration suites and things that are offered that allow for productivity to stay at a heightened level and not worry so much about the platform. And then the third thing that I'm seeing is that the technology organizations are really focused on providing good services. And this is a big shift, right? It's about delivery of services and making sure it's highly available all the time, not just not during the business hours, if you will, but off hours, so education can continue once educators leave the four walls. So I think it's critically important, and that's part of the demand that everybody's looking for. Accessibility, 365 days.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you could also share with us one or two challenges that you had to overcome in your, in the implementation of your strategy.
Just one or two, or?
Yeah, I'm sure there was only one or two.
I'm sure. If I could sum it up, it's adoption. It's organizational change management, which is really the tough part, right? It's a different way of thinking. And that starts with the IT organization saying that we're going to not have so many things that are in the server room, but also thinking about not having a server room. What does that mean? Where do we store our information? That is a huge change for organizations to get their arms around. There's a vested employee that thinks if you go to the cloud, there's an opportunity for them to lose employment, things of that nature, and that's not the case. So the challenges that we face are about re-educating as well as reskilling our employees about new opportunities within this cloud space so they can become even more valuable to the organization and so that they can see the vision and direction where we're going. So that was a great opportunity. And so that was a lot of fun to be able to repurpose, if you will, individuals. And then the other thing was a big challenge for us. We had some instability within our network. So the physical infrastructure was a challenge. And so we had to make an investment, a significant investment, and to make sure that we were able to carry out this strategy around the solution that we were going to, or solutions that we're going to acquire. And that's critical. If your infrastructure is not up to par, then the cloud strategy is going to be one of those things that's going to reflect badly, meaning it's going to be an IT issue and educators are going to say, see, I told you this is going to fail. So make the investment, understand that your infrastructure is really tight and right for delivery purposes, and then branch out to see and go into the application space and understanding what that looks like. So we did spend a lot of time around making sure that the infrastructure was correct, and we made a significant investment.
Well, very good. And we thank you very much, Rod, for participating in our panel today.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kenneth Thompson. Dr. Thompson has spent more than 20 years leading IT organizations in K-12 districts and is currently the Chief Information Technology Officer at the San Antonio Independent School District. Welcome, Dr. Thompson.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Thompson, your district has recently decided to include cloud computing in its cloud strategy. Why did you decide to make that jump?
It was a perfect opportunity here in San Antonio. And it all started with our superintendent, our CEO's vision, and his vision was to make us a model. And it put us in a position where we are in a total rebuild state here in San Antonio, which gave us a clean sheet of paper, if you will. We're in a position now where we are building, our own WAN. We're building our new data center. We're deploying devices, Stereo here. So. To Mr. Hope's comment, tight and right, we were not tight and right, so we had opportunity to explore other options. And it was all wrapped around efficiency and effectiveness and availability. It's our goal when they access tools to ensure that, regardless if it's a student, staff, that those tools that access was available to them. So we were put in a place where we had the ability to explore what is right for San Antonio right now. What tools, what infrastructure, what services could we bring on board to shape this in a way, not just for the next couple of years, but 10 years out. We're in a place now that we have all the tools in front of us. So one of those pieces, one of those considerations were exactly that. We looked at all of it. We looked at infrastructure as a service. We looked at application as a service. We looked at devices as a service. We looked at all the key services that we could bake into our talent pool. And I'm sure my colleagues around the country will agree with me. We had to also look at our internal support structure. Do we have the resources in place to support what we're envisioning, what our strategy, that aligns and support our overall strategy for the district? And again, with that, even with me, we throw those terms around, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. Well, what does it really mean? I had to step away and bring in the smart people to allow me, what does infrastructure as a service, what does cloud services truly look like? And after doing that deep dive, after learning more, after getting wrapped around exactly what it means and how it could support our vision here in San Antonio, we decided on what components, and what tiers, what applications, as we looked at our strategy for recovery, what's essential, what needs to be available in at what time and when. So it was just part of our overall roadmap. We developed our map. We picked services that would support us, services that my team internally could support, what skill sets that we need, and we landed where we are now. And I can't say it has proven critical, and it has, the investment has proven that we have made the right decision, and recently, as in the last month, few weeks. So it is a good fit. It is helping us to move our district to a place that we have never been before, and providing that availability to our students and staff. And it has allowed us to, and let's save a few dollars, because again, in K-12, you have to look at the cost, because again, to build, the maintenance on these boxes, those type of things, all of those things came into play. And we just chose those things to do it. And what was the right fit? Because it is a true paradigm shift. It is a shift. It's a shift. And again, I think I heard it earlier, for my internal team. My team was used to touching it, seeing it, going in and see the light on and the fan blowing, but not having those resources readily at hand, and that the support structure and the availability, the overall, it has enhanced. So it has proven us to support us well here in San Antonio. It is aligned in strategy. We're not there yet. We're down the road, but there are other pieces that we're putting in play. And we're still identifying, and we're still shifting, and we're still building here. But to date, it has proven to be a good fit for us here as we sit here today.
Yeah, thank you. How critical was it for you to get your team involved from the beginning, as this is a shift that as you said, it definitely affected them, and as Rod pointed out, right? It's they often they definitely feel like they have skin in the game. So how important was it for you to get them involved in the detailed planning?
I often say people allows an organization to move forward. It is the people. And if they do not understand the value, if they do not understand what it can do for the organization, if they don't understand the overall structure, if they don't have buy-in, then it is stagnant. It will not move forward. It will not be successful. I had to bring them to the table, and again, part of those conversations, as we did our discoveries, they were very much involved in those conversations to understand what is cloud, how does it support us, and the old premise, the old paradigm, you got to have it here, get it out in the support and the cost savings, the enhanced efficiencies that it brings. They had to understand that, not just Ken Thompson, but the entire team had to. And it wasn't just the infrastructure, but the application team, the support team. How do we get it? So if they do not buy in to the overall strategy, you set yourself up for failure from the front end. If the team can't support it, if the team do not understand it, if the team does not understand the value, I truly believe we would have. I would still be probably at first base on this thing. We would not have moved forward. But today, we're at a place now that they do understand it. They do understand, and again, it's continuous, it's fluid now. Are they completely there? And it's that right fit question. They have to understand, but now we're going through that matrix. What are the tools? What are the applications? What services can we push out? What services we need here? What's the redundancy look like? What does business continuity look like? In the case of emergency, what do we need? What are our tiered applications? What do we need to have right now? All of those things pushing out that we cannot afford to push out to ensure that we have that capacity for the district to support us in our overall mission.
Sure. Dr. Thompson, you've mentioned, that cost analysis was part of your decision. What were some of the, what did you assess in terms of cost efficiency in cloud, as you were making your decision to move to cloud computing?
Both the hard and the soft costs. Anyone would tell you, you look at the maintenance on those servers, you look at the support of your staff, you have to look at the skill set of your staff because technology is changing every day. The different tool upgrade outages, what could we afford? We looked at both the hard dollars and soft dollars, and the soft was kind of hard to measure, but overall, the overall success of the organization, what was critical for us right now? How can we save these dollars? We comparing a $100,000 server to cloud services. What is compare that cost to the monthly or the annual cost of putting those services in the cloud? And partnering with an organization or someone like ENA that not only will help you shape that vision, but also support you in your struggle and in your strategy implementation was critical in the overall approach.
So what were you, can you kind of expand on that a little bit? What were you looking for specifically in a cloud service provider?
It was very unique. It's someone, and sadly to say, and not just because I'm on the ENA call, but the way that the services are packaged, the way the offerings, the support, the maintenance, the availability, the services, and also a true partner. I needed a partner because, again, dollars are not very prevalent, but make them go as far as we possibly can make them go in assisting us in reaching that goal. And I must say the partner component of that criteria was most critical because as we had discussions, and I mentioned the smart people in the front piece, having that conversation to determine what pieces fit, what pieces does not, what's smart to move forward with now, what do we need to delay? Based on my current investment in my infrastructure, what should I maintain, what should I keep? Someone that would have that conversation with me that allowed me to make those right decisions, to determine that fit, to determine the direction, to allow me to adjust and develop my overall strategy, not just cloud, but overall strategy for IT as a whole, was vital in making that decision. So someone that, number one, that had those skill sets and had that history and understanding and those tools to allow you to do that and to shape it in that way, to make us successful.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. Appreciate your thoughts there. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Jill Pierce. Jill has worked in instructional technology for over 24 years and is currently the Chief Technology Officer at McMinn County School System in Tennessee. Welcome, Jill, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Simone. I appreciate you guys having me.
So, Jill, you decided to leverage the cloud as a risk management strategy for protecting your data. Why did you opt for the cloud, and how did you go about designing your backup solution?
Well, I think it follows along what the other two illustrious speakers were talking about, having that plan, making sure that your people that are involved in that, your stakeholders, understand what you're doing. So the first thing about risk management that's very important in cloud technology is figuring out what data needs to be in disaster and recovery. And most people assume that's everything, including the operating systems and all that. But in today's times, it's more about that actual data that is changed on a daily basis, not so much your operating system. Those can be loaded as long as we can get the data back. And so really getting a handle on what data you're going to back up, just like you would do the plan on deciding whether you want a local server. So we started looking at this we also looked at how much time myself and my staff was spending on disaster and recovery with some local servers and some other vendors that we were using, and how much time that takes, and if there is an incidence of where you had to pull from a disaster and recovery standpoint and pull data to a certain server or something like that, then how long did it take us to get it back up? All of those things are key, because in education, a lot of people forget, you know, we've got a certain amount of hours. We have children that we're teaching, and if we're using instructional technology, the data that they have available to them, they can't be down just like they would be in any type of business. And so sometimes people forget that. So that's where these strategies come in play. So the first thing we did is kind of break down and really look and talk to our end users that data that we need to keep. And of course, everybody thinks their data is important, so we categorized it with the help of our departments and things like that. Things that a lot of people don't think about, and came up like HVAC. You know, those are critical, and if something, most of those are electronic now with some type of server thing. And so then we started looking at how we wanted to do that. In the past, we had a local server that was backing up, and then we had an off-site server, because when you talk about business rules and how you manage your data, that's the way it was in the old days. So we really wanted to make sure that we still followed the fact that but the other thing was owning our data was important, because a lot of times schools get into these agreements of backup data, and it takes them an excessive amount of time to get that data off that off-site server, depending on what proprietary software they're using for backup. So that was really key when we started looking. The other thing is to get a cost matrix. The others talked about that. Really looking about what it was costing us to back up, and that was everything from the actual cost of the software to what it was yearly, to how much time it took and what it cost us when somebody had to be pulled from their regular job to take a disaster and recovery and all that. And so we did a huge analysis across the board after we figured out exactly. And like I said, we found things that we probably didn't do as good a job of backing up, that now we've got all of that in the cloud. It's done daily, in some cases done more often than that. And in that case, and we did a pretty extensive search across the board, and we went with E&A solution, Trust Backup. One of the hardest things for school districts is to have something go to the cloud, but they forget they have to have something do the backup on wherever that server or computer or wherever that data is. They have to do the backup first and then typically push it to the cloud. So most cloud solutions don't have that push capability, and that was so that means you have to buy a secondary or a third party, and that was one of the things that sometimes really becomes cost prohibitive. And so when we started looking at this, that was one of the keys. So now we have everything under this. It's backed up daily, and we own our data, and that's very important that districts make sure that they can get to their data anytime they need it. And it's been a huge cost savings for us.
Where did you find the cost savings for your particular solution?
Well, right off the top of the bat, after we did our cost analysis, we were paying. We're considered a small rural district, so obviously somebody like Dr. Thompson would probably pay more than we do because he's in a lot bigger district, a lot more students. But with our changing to a cloud-based solution that does the push and that it has an ease, because I can't stress this enough, you know, how much training that you have to do on software for your technicians or anybody that access it, and to get it up and running, that's part of that critical time, and that's cost you money, even though a lot of times schools, when we do those cost analysis, it's very important that you think about what it costs for you to put somebody on that job when you have some type of thing like this, because that's money out the door just like anything else. And so one of the nice things about what we've done with E&A's Trust Backup is we can have, and we've had at least a couple of instances, and at no fault, you know, just the way we do business, and we've had some serious things where we had an issue with hard drives and things like that, and we were able to go from the time it went down and have something back up using Trust Backup within less than about an hour and a half. So that turnaround time, we've never had that with our old products that we use. It was a lot longer than that, and so I'm saving money both ways, on the product and on the time that it takes us to, go to that next step to get that data back into the stream for education. So in the first year that we went with Trust Backup, we saved about $16,000 in our district, which is a huge chunk of money when you think over for a small district like us.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. How important is it to you to test your backups? Do you do periodic testing?
We do. But one of the nice things with that we find typically most companies do not have a test for the backup, and depending on, and this is where it gets into a little bit more technical, because it does depend where the data is located and how that data has to be reset to the piece of software or device it's going to. So, that can be very different in the environments, because we've got some very things that we can do very quickly, and we have some things that because of, not because of the backup, but just getting the device back up and running, depending on what it is and what data it is. So one of the nice things about this, we can go in there and look at that data and actually open it up and see exactly what we've got. A lot of times with old backup systems that schools use, and they hang on to, even if they've got a disaster or risk management plan or disaster and recovery plan, they can't see their data. They have a file, but they can't open up that file and see if that data is there. And so those are the kind of things. The other thing I think is important is we realize that a lot of times we don't do backups on certain things too, like one of the big issues in schools now is security cameras. Well, most of those are an appliance that needs to be backed up. And so having those type of plans, just like the other two distinguished gentlemen talked about earlier, that plan is about, getting your hands around what is needed to be backed up. If our security cameras go down, that's a huge safety issue. And so we want to make sure that we've got backups of it. It's not stuff that we save because they do wipe over themselves after so long, but if we have a pending thing that we need to get to, we don't want to be able to lose that and have those go down. So, having those procedures in place and having a good product in place saves you those steps in time when you really need to get something back up and running, whether it's, and I treat safety issues just as important as instructional issues, because all of our jobs here are to educate children. Our first job is to make them feel safe and protected, and our second job is to educate them. And so these processes in the cloud and the way it's going has made that job a lot easier. Now, you got to do your homework, and you want to make sure you get the right products, but I do think that those are the kind of things that really make a difference when we start looking, long-term and planning for what we need to do. The other thing is you also want to make sure that whoever you use grows with you. I talked about planning. It's very hard to future-proof in technology, and I kind of really not a big fan of that word. But one of the things with risk management and your backups and anything you want to do, you want to make sure that the cloud, the one thing the cloud does for you that a computer, server, or anything can't do for you is most likely they can grow with you without a huge amount of expense. So depending on what it is, if I have to upgrade a server, that's probably going to be a lot more expensive than adding more space to my cloud account to do whatever backup or data storage that we use in the district. And so that's where we're seeing that cost saving. So we can use that money to spend other places that we need it, because money's always tight, and any place that we can save a buck is going to be very important to a district.
I think to every district, that's probably true. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. That's a remarkable story. Thank you. Our final panelist today is Michael McCurley. Michael has worked in instructional technology for over 24 years and joins us today as the CTO and Vice President of Technology and Innovation here at ENA. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Simone.
So Michael, ENA has been providing IT solutions to the education community for well over 20 years and have just added cloud services to the portfolio in 2016. So when it comes to cloud, how do the needs of K-12 differ from enterprise businesses and startups?
That's a great question, and something we think about a lot at ENA because we continually work almost exclusively within learning communities and try to be a good partner to those communities, and understanding how their needs are similar to or different from enterprises or other kind of B2B offerings that are commonly on the market is where we spend a lot of our time and where we discuss a lot of things with our K-12 partners. So a couple of things. One, I think school districts obviously have the same security, reliability, operational optimization, and specifically in K-12, cost optimization concerns as any other business might. Where they differ significantly from many enterprises is in two ways. One, the school IT staff, the people working for Dr. Thompson and Ms. Pierce, they simply are not allocated the same number of resources to manage the breadth of technology that their mission requires them to manage, as we often see in enterprises. We all know K-12 schools are often asked to do more with less, and specifically in K-12 IT departments, we see this all over. Just the number of devices that are supported by a technician in K-12 is often significantly higher, often by multiples, even multiples of 10 than you see in private enterprise. The amount of technology there is to manage, et cetera, per staff member, it's just really daunting to many K-12 school districts, and particularly to their IT groups. Two, most school districts don't have a cloud architect. So when they look at some of the other options available to them, the kind of traditional Amazons or Azures or Google Cloud, et cetera, those are certainly robust offerings. I don't want to say anything negative about them. It's just that they are designed really for an enterprise that has an architect and an entire cloud team. And what we find in K-12 is that many K-12 school districts are interested in moving to the cloud. They have missions where the cloud would be a much better fit, both in terms of operationalizing their cost over time, providing some predictability, some future proofing, et cetera. But transforming their IT team to be one of cloud architects and cloud engineers is just very difficult for them to do. Frankly, it's also difficult in enterprise. So it's more difficult oftentimes in K-12. And then finally, and as it relates specifically to cloud, many enterprises like the variability of the kind of traditional cloud model where they pay more as they use it more and they pay less as they use it less. But that unpredictability is really problematic to the procurement process in K-12. So in our discussions before we got into the cloud business with some of school districts across the nation, like what is it that you like about cloud services that are currently available? What would you want to have changed? The predictability of billing and the understanding of what expenses would look like pretty far into the future was really critical, and that's why we spent a lot of time on that and in terms of how we rolled out ENA Trust Compute.
Thank you. That is awesome. What is ENA's approach to making cloud more consumable for K-12 then?
Well, we started with kind of two primary objectives. We wanted to deliver a complete and secure virtual cloud environment to K-12 school districts that was just as robust, just as reliable, and just as extensive as those that were available through some of our competitors. But we also wanted to do that in a way in which we could provide predictable monthly costs to the school district. And so that's why we came up with, as you're well aware, these kind of these packages where in a virtual private cloud environment, unlike a public cloud environment, we provide school districts with a certain bundle of resources. So that includes CPU, RAM, drive space, IOPS, et cetera. And from that environment, they can create and destroy virtual machines all day long, and their pricing doesn't change. So we provide them a bundle of resources. Those resources, it's like having a private cloud, like you might on-premise, except it's a virtual private cloud kind of in the cloud. And you get those resources dedicated to your environment, and you can do whatever you want with those resources. And you don't ever have to pay more unless you need some more resources. And we have some pretty cost-effective ways to upgrade and seamlessly. And that's a way in which we also make the transition easier for our school districts. So they want to move to the cloud. They're used to a procurement process in which they buy a certain number of servers, they buy VMware or whatever. Suddenly the costs go up and up and up. And they can more easily compare what they would get with ENA's Trust Compute service. Like, here's the amount of resources I get, here's the CPU, here's the RAM, et cetera, et cetera. I want to operationalize that over time. What does that look like? And then we move forward. A couple other things we wanted to do, again, the IT staff members in K-12, in my opinion, are some of the most dedicated and most adept professionals working in the United States today. They have to do so much, often with very little. And what we wanted to do was give them all the controls that they wanted. So it's a fully hosted kind of cloud environment, and they want, control to tear down and bring up and change operating systems, et cetera, with their virtual machines. But we wanted to make that as easy as possible. As Jill mentioned, the time that her team needs to spend doing this as opposed to something else, it has an opportunity cost, and we wanted to make it as easy as possible for technicians to be able to spin up machines, spin down machines, transfer data, et cetera, et cetera. So we really focused a lot on a kind of an elegant and not simple, because these are complex tasks, but as simple as possible interface so they can get the job done intuitively and really easily. We also knew that school districts didn't really have their own cloud architects. And one of the things they didn't like about kind of traditional monolithic cloud services was that they didn't really have anyone to call. There wasn't anyone to say, hey, I'm thinking about, building a Postgres database or a Microsoft SQL database in the cloud. How do I allocate resources? How do I do load balancing, et cetera? And so we have two things. One, a staff of cloud engineers available to our K-12 customers and partners just as part of the Trust Compute service, so they can call upon us and we can help them kind of design things. And then two, we have our classic ENA Premier live in-person, 24/7/365 customer service and customer support. And that was how, we wanted to distinguish ourselves from other offerings, and we wanted to make sure that, to the degree that we could, ensure that K-12 school districts across the nation had an opportunity to move to the cloud for all the reasons that Jill and Dr. Thompson and Rod mentioned.
Fantastic. Michael, one more question for you in the 2 minutes that we have remaining. How will ENA continue to innovate for K-12?
Good question. Well, we have ENA has a long history with K-12. As you mentioned in your introduction, or as Dennis mentioned, we serve over 800 school districts and library institutions today, as well as a growing number of higher education and community colleges. So we're really focused on the needs of learning communities, and particularly the needs of learning communities as they, embrace a digital future. So one of the main ways that we continue to innovate is twofold. One, historically we've been an infrastructure as a service solution provider, not just in K-12, but in networking and Wi-Fi in the schools and Wi-Fi in the libraries and voice telecommunications, et cetera. But we're increasingly focused on helping school districts understand all this data that they're now putting in the cloud or they now have access to. So we spent a lot of time over the last year really evaluating what kind of analytics schools need. There's not a lack of data in K-12. There's sometimes a lack of understanding or getting actionable intelligence out of that data. So that's an area of ongoing innovation for us, is really what data do we provide to school districts? What data do school districts get from other sources? And is there actionable intelligence out of that data that could really change student outcomes for the better. And so we spend a lot of time with school districts talking to them about that. And then more generally, we really believe at ENA in a deep partnership with our customers and particularly our friends in the K-12 community. So we do a lot of what we call kind of ethnographic surveys. So I'm sure many people on the call and many of our panelists have received these kind of generic, form surveys in the mail or an email, excuse me. How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do this in your school district? And we find those, somewhat interesting, but we also don't like to bother people with that. And instead, what we like to do is sit down with 10 or 15 school districts representing different rurality, different sizes, and different regions of the country, and really get kind of an understanding. And when we have CIOs and CTOs and their staff spend a few hours with us, we find a lot of insight. We gather a lot of insights that they provide us, and that helps us kind of curate our roadmap and deliver things that we know don't just solve problems that we've noticed on a generic survey, but that we've actually talked about with real customers who have real needs. And we find that that is a much better way to kind of do software development and product development more generally.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Dennis, I think we're ready for to take some questions, if there are any questions.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Simone, and thanks to all of the panelists. You've given everybody a lot of good information to consider. I want to remind participants that if you'd like to ask a question of any of the panelists, it's not too late to do so. You can use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. We have a question for both of the school district panelists. When you started working on the necessary hardware components to handle your cloud strategy, how did you go about doing that?
I can go. Again, it was all we planned. It was working sessions with both the vendor, my team internally. Once we decided what direction we wanted to go, and again, the skill sets, the ability to do that, and the interfaces, the failover, those components. It was a conversation. It was a true planning conversation strategy, a migration strategy of what tools that we needed. One example was our DNSs. We have several on-prem, in virtual boxes, and one in the cloud. So the hardware necessary to support both of those environments, the expertise, and it was conversation. Truly using expertise of ENA and using my internal team helped us to shape that and ensure that we had the right not only hardware, but sources and pathways in place to ensure that it was truly a success.
Thank you. Jill, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I would just say that sometimes people get around to keep it simple. I do think that you have to have the planning piece and all that Dr. Thompson said, but I do think one of the things we did is we looked at everything that we needed to back up, what we were backing up existing, and then we looked at things through, because you got to look also at your privacy. Things that could have an intrusion or different things like that, because you're also working on those things besides, this is just one part of what we do in technology and education. So we just actually literally sat down and looked at every local prem server, every different thing that was a critical thing, not at individual teacher computers, because that's done through individual cloud, but things that would be important if they went down, food service, those kind of things. And so we literally just went on each device and looked at how much space we were using of data on that, what we were using currently, and then we figured out if we would need growth. And that's just getting your team together and just doing some hard work, and then we worked out an analysis on what we were backing up and what we wanted to add, so we knew exactly how much space we would need. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things when we need to look, and then we figured what would happen if we add different other systems to that thing to figure out exactly what we needed to begin with. The great thing about cloud technology, and that's the thing that people need to do, you can get what you need now and get your price analysis and get that, but it'll grow with you. And that's one of the nice things, and that's one of the reasons we did go with ENA, because, you know, if something comes up and we have to buy a server because it's this software that can't be run any other way, and sometimes that happens in school districts, it happens in business. You know, we want it in the cloud, but that doesn't, so we know we have to do a backup of that, then we can add that without hardly anything, and it's a very low cost because we've planned that out through our year. And so what happens there is that we can have a growth technology in our risk management for backups.
Great, thanks. Dr. Thompson, which specific applications are you looking at putting in the cloud, and what goes into that decision as you're making that decision about what to put in the cloud and maybe what not to put in the cloud?
Again, it's a group decision. Not only a group decision, but I have even had my cabinet baked into this, at least the superintendent's cabinet, baked into this conversation. Currently, you know, the email, and many people will say that your ERP is your Tier 1 application, your SIS, because you need to locate the students, the bus routing system. But when I arrived here, shortly after, it was email because it was going down. And that, you know, and I won't say this, I guess I am saying it in public, but that became a Tier 1 application for me. So that was the first application that we pushed out. Then, you know, and again, your network, we start pushing out, you know, you have multiple DNSs, start pushing that up into the cloud. Our ERP, making sure it's available. And again, it's savings not only because a good friend of mine has told me, friends don't let friends build data centers. And he should laugh now, but you know, quickly to get that efficient efficiency. So it's been an evaluation process. And yes, matrix. Yes, we applied matrix. Yes, we applied our DR plan to it. The priority, what tier that application was, it's tier 0, tier 1. But we're slowly determining what put out. And again, just recently, we pushed our web server out there. So the district websites is out in the cloud now. So it is continually to grow. Will we be 100% cloud? And I don't think so. But when the opportunity prevails itself, and I could save the team, because I truly do not believe that my team here will grow tremendously. And at the same time, if I could skill them to shift their skill sets and they focus other places, that has shaped my overall strategy. What I have put out there, what I keep on-prem, but I think that list is going to continue to grow. But I think over time, those conversations, and also dependent on the high demand and availability based on the matrix that we apply to it, we'll continue to decide what we keep on-prem and what we put out. Hopefully I got to where you wanted me to be on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Rod, you had mentioned
if I can
earlier.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
No, go, Dennis. No, please, because I think your question is going to lead right into I can build off of Dr. Thompson's response. But go ahead.
I was just going to say that you had mentioned earlier in the presentation the need for organizational change management. And I was wondering, this is a question really for any of the panelists, but what messaging have you found to be effective in getting support for a cloud strategy, and what messages might resonate with different stakeholder groups effectively?
Sure. So thank you for the question. And so what I heard my esteemed colleagues talk about, not only in Dr. Thompson referred to people and the necessity to get them on board, which totally agree, and that's top to bottom, and also thinking about the alternative ways that you're going to support a very diverse type of offering, and this is a cloud strategy. But I also heard Jill talk about process, right? Looking at the processes that are all out there and determining what's right, what's the right fit. And to Dr. Thompson's point, when he's just iterating about what applications are right, I think you have to determine what's right for the cloud. Some things will be, some things won't be. But you're going to have to go through a vetting process, and Jill talked about that as well. And so we talk about people and process. And then lastly, there's a consideration about the tool, right? Not the technology, but the tool. And what is the right tool? And how do you actually get there? And so that's a part of the overall organizational change management. And that is a paradigm shift. And individuals are going to have to understand that's complicated. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be a 3-day, 3-week, 3-month type of effort, but it's going to be continuous. So think of it a crawl, walk, run process. Set some milestones along the way of where you want to be, and then check the box to make sure that you are achieving those goals, and then allow some flexibility to allow that shift in thinking to achieve those goals that you've established. Organizational change management is the hard piece of the work, folks. It's not the technology. That's the easy part. But the people in the process, the most difficult part of transforming an organization. But stick with it. There are people here that can help you to get through that process.
Great, thanks. Did any of the other panelists want to weigh in on the change management piece?
I would just add something that's probably a little more simple, from a simplistic thing, from a lot smaller school district and all that kind of stuff. That the one thing that people get very confused about when they talk about the cloud, because we're talking about different areas of this, is, all schools are now buying, and because this is the offerings we have, when we talk about instructional software, anything, a lot of that's already in the cloud. And so when we talk about setting your plan and things, you've got to know when you meet with your people, and we've talked about this, but I'm just going to talk a little bit because we've talked about two kind of frames here, is that we want to make sure that we are, any data that's already on the web, it's in the cloud. And so the biggest thing that we have to do, being the stewards of this data from the technology side, is to make sure that the company that we are dealing with, these vendors we're dealing with, has a good strategy for backing up our data there, because none of that data is local. And that's typically done through your contracts and things. And then we've talked about, the risk management, and we talked about DNS servers and all of those, how that data gets backed up. And I think we've got to be very clear about that, these are two areas. And then the third area is that desktop or computer-based cloud, which generally can be done in some of these things like Google and Office 365, if you train your teachers to do the backups and things like that. So, the cloud is a very expansive term. It's kind of like computing. When you say computing, it can mean a lot of different things. And one of the things that this webinar, I think, is done is, we're talking about really these 3 parts of cloud and how all of us have kind of done this with ENA, and we feel, but if you don't have a plan and you don't know which strategy, which one of these areas you're going for first, because you can't eat the elephant in one bite. You got to do it in pieces. And so, I think that's where we're saying this planning and making sure your personnel and the training, going back to what Michael said, this is very important when you think about your planning for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. All good points. We're nearing the end of our time, so Simone, I want to turn it back over to you, and then I'll do a quick wrap-up after that.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. And I want to say thank you again to our panelists. We really appreciate having you here today to share your experience. And thank you to our audience for spending this hour with us. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from these technology leaders. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to, I'll echo that. Thanks to all of the speakers today for a very informative presentation. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. Hopefully you gained some good insight that will help you effectively plan your cloud strategy and infrastructure. As a reminder, you'll receive an email within the next few days that contains a link to the recording of this presentation along with the slides. And if you haven't already done so, please also take a minute to download the additional resources that ENA has provided to the left of your screen. And if you have any other thoughts or questions about any of the information you heard today, I'd encourage you to follow up with Simone directly using the contact information in that final slide. So thanks again, everybody, for participating, and have a great day.